19th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity for us to come together like this and have this very, very important hearing. It's affecting millions and millions of Americans every single day, and we hear the horror stories of the negative effects of what's happening, especially when it comes to little children and communities across America. We're standing at a very unique point in American history where a number of technologies are converging to create a digital landscape that could prove to be unfriendly to democracy and the public. Advances in generative artificial intelligence, as well as the rolling back of social media content moderation policies, are opening the door to a boom in mis- and disinformation in our information ecosystem. Americans who are invested in the least by social media platforms will invariably bear the brunt of this. We've seen this play out in the past 2 decades and cycles of our elections, where Americans whose primary language is Spanish and other languages were exposed to higher levels of false information online. That includes inaccurate information about access to reproductive health, vaccine safety, and election integrity. Rampant mis- and disinformation serves to weaken democracy and embolden our adversaries abroad, as well as radical elements here in our own country. It has a real-world effect on public health. With a major U.S. election looming this fall, we need to be paying attention. There needs to be accountability from the platforms that we trust to connect Americans with each other and the world, with the world around them, to ensure that information is designed to harm them, not allowed to spread wildly in the name of driving engagement and record-breaking profits. That accountability also needs to lead to equitable investments in fighting mis- and disinformation in languages beyond English. Dr. Franks, in your testimony, you talk about how the protections the tech industry currently enjoys because of Section 230 have resulted in a warped incentive structure that can create profit at the expense of tremendous harm to people. I've sent multiple letters to online platforms with my colleagues highlighting these platforms' lack of investment in Spanish language content moderation, and while the responses we get are sometimes receptive to the problem, we don't see a follow-through of an investment on acting on it. As things currently stand, do social media platforms have any incentive to seriously invest in Spanish language content moderation outside of a fear of public shaming?
I would say that unfortunately the answer is probably not much. Public shaming can do a little bit, but we've already seen that in some of the documents and the conversations that have been revealed by whistleblowers and others, that tech officials often openly talk amongst themselves about how, oh, there's a new scandal, we're probably going to get called before Congress, we're going to be asked some embarrassing questions, and then everybody's going to move on, we'll go back to making money. So I think given the way that Section 230 has clearly been read and interpreted for these companies as essentially guaranteeing them, you won't have to face the consequences of your actions, you end up with a perfectly rational but terrible situation where profit-seeking companies think they can expand their enterprises, they can offer all of these services without offering any of these protections, as you're pointing out.
What would an incentive structure look like that would produce a reasonable investment in non-English language content moderation on social media platforms?
I think at a minimum, you would have to really restrain the definition and the interpretation of C1, right? The provision that's essentially saying you are not responsible, you, Facebook, or whoever the company is, you're not responsible for these issues. That is, as I've mentioned before, being used to defend against any number of claims that are really far beyond anything contemplated by Section 230, I think, in 1996. And really what you would need to show is that if you are causing harm by pushing out a product that you have not established appropriate safeguards for instance, it should be clear that if you are targeting and making your product accessible to people who do not speak English, or that you are offering it outside of your company's own chosen language, you need to have protections in place and linguistic competence in place and cultural competence in place in order to make that a safe product. But if Section 230 is interpreted as saying you can simply throw up your hands and say, we just offered a great service and maybe we didn't do it very well and maybe it's not that safe, it's not our responsibility. I think that particular interpretation of C1 definitely has to be restricted.
We don't treat bank robbers like that. If somebody drives somebody to a bank robbery, we don't say, oh, you just drove the car, you didn't run in and rob the bank. the others did. You're still held accountable. You're involved in that situation. You are an integral part of how and what took place. We don't have that for these organizations. And if you'll indulge me, I'd just like to ask you to give us your written interpretation of what a cyber civil rights bill should look like, or some of the elements thereof. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I went over my time.
Thank you very much.